Joe Biden's fake town hall, all the lies.
Mr. Reagan.
So Joe Biden held a fake town hall the other day, and he lied all the way through it. What do I mean by it was a fake town hall? Look at this printed out note card. This whole town hall was staged. Wikipedia describes a town hall forum this way. Attendees use town halls to voice their opinions and question elected officials, political candidates, and public figures. But none of these questions were dreamed up by voters. This was not a real town hall. All these questions were clearly prepared by the Joe Biden team. And these prepared questions were printed out and given to these ordinary Americans for them to ask. This is a town hall style Q&A with prepared questions and answers. They might as well have had Joe Biden just speak without being asked questions at all. I mean, this is basically a Joe Biden stump speech, interrupted occasionally by staged questions used to prompt the next topic. This was weak and sad. The New York Post recently reported that two of the so-called undecided voters.
Let's go to Ismail Eliano, who voted for Hillary Clinton 4 years ago, but has voted Republican in the past.
Were, in fact, not undecided voters at all, but rather staunch Biden supporters. And even more corrupt, it was just discovered that during the new ABC town hall, two Democrat operatives were planted in the minuscule audience as if they were average voters. Now, it was obvious that every person asking a question to Joe Biden was handpicked by the Biden team. But for them to choose Democrat operatives, well, this just makes the truth about the entire town hall as a corrupt shadow play all the more obvious. Now, this woman here, the woman who claimed that her son is a transgender girl, this woman is Mika Hake.
I'm the proud mom of two girls, 8 and 10. My youngest daughter is transgender.
So your youngest daughter is actually your son, whom you encourage to dress up like a girl and call himself trans. I'm pretty sure that that's a form of child abuse, but whatever. So this woman, Mika, her husband is Ezra Naines. This guy is a well-known Democrat operative in Pennsylvania, and he was a 2018 nominee for the Senate.
Hi, everybody. This is Ezra Naines. It is crunch time. And I'm proud of the grassroots campaign that we've run.
Even more disturbing is this guy. This is Nathan Osborne. As it turns out, he actually worked for the Obama administration for the Office of Public Affairs. Now, at the debate here, his profession is merely listed as communications. And I don't really get this. The Biden folks couldn't find regular Americans to ask these questions? Regular folks couldn't be trusted? You had to bring in Democrat operatives to ask these questions? I mean, this is ridiculous. But it just goes to show how corrupt everything about the Biden operation is. Compare this to Trump, who goes into a town hall with no control over anything. It's basically, he's attacked by the so-called moderator the entire time. Whatever you think of him, Trump is genuine. He can't not be genuine because he's got everybody in the media working against him. Biden, on the other hand, is a total fraud.
I'm getting out to get an application to be a lifeguard in the African American community because there was a big swimming pool complex. And these two men, well-dressed, leaned up and hugged one another and kissed one another. I'm getting out of the car at the light, and I turned to my dad. My dad looked at me and said, "Joey, it's simple. They love each other."
All right, there are a lot of really bad lies here. I break them all down in one moment. First, you have to skip ahead because I have to sell you something. Now, I sometimes watch these fitness guys on YouTube, and one thing that they commonly suggest is supplementing your diet with a vegetable powder if you're not getting enough greens. And I definitely do not get enough greens. Most of us don't eat enough vegetables. You probably don't. You know who you are, guys. We like our steaks, not broccoli. And this is why I started to take this, Metabolic Greens Plus, 1 scoop every morning. This stuff, it'll give you a lot of the healthy nutrients that you would ordinarily get from vegetables, but without actually eating vegetables. So I've been taking this for a while now, and okay, they actually scripted this into the ad, but this actually is true for me. My clothes really are fitting better, and I've got a lot more energy lately. And I'm also intermittent fasting, so that's probably a lot of it, but I do think that this stuff is playing a critical role in me getting healthier. This stuff is $49, 30 servings per container, so it's a month's worth. And actually, I was taking something else that was very similar to this before I switched over, but I did switch, well, I mean, obviously because they're sponsoring my show, but also because of the ingredients. If you read this, it's got, let's see here, barley extract, alfalfa extract, wheatgrass, broccoli, spirulina, green tea extract. This is all great stuff. For your metabolism, they've got ginger root extract, cinnamon bark extract, turmeric extract. They've got some probiotics in here, enzymes. This stuff is fantastic. Way better than the stuff I was taking before. So yeah, I definitely do recommend it. Now there's a 1-year satisfaction guarantee, free delivery, it's non-GMO, it's made in the USA, so check it out. Metabolic Greens Plus. Go ahead and click on the link in the description below. If you're trying to lose weight, if you're trying to get more greens, if you're trying to stay healthy, this stuff is excellent.
Live from the Perez Art Museum in Miami, here's Lester Holt.
The role of president, in my opinion, should be to unify as much as possible. So what 3 actions will you take as president to get us back to being one country versus several little, fiefdoms that are trying to yell each other about who's wrong and right?
It's always appropriate to question another man's judgment, but not their motive.
It's appropriate to question a man's judgment, but not his motives. Attributing false motivations to conservatives is the foundation for the entire leftist political philosophy. Trump, why do you want to build a wall between the US and Mexico? Why? To keep drugs out, to keep criminals out, to better secure the border against international terrorists, and to keep out cheap labor that will take jobs away from low-income Americans. Wrong! It's because you are a racist. Trump, why do you want to stop flights from China? Why, to curtail the spread of coronavirus, of course. Wrong! It's because you are a racist. Trump, why do you use an iPhone instead of a Samsung? Well, because... Wrong! Because you're a racist. Everything's because we're racist. That's why we do everything, conservatives.
The recent poll said 65% of Americans think the president bears some responsibility for contracting this virus. Do you agree?
Look, anybody who contracts the virus by essentially saying masks don't matter, social distancing doesn't matter, I think is responsible for what happens to them.
What the hell is he talking about? Trump never said masks don't matter. Trump never said social distancing doesn't matter. Trump never said anything like that. Here's what Trump actually said.
And we're asking everybody that when you are not able to socially distance, wear a mask, get a mask. Whether you like the mask or not, they have an impact, they'll have an effect, and we need everything we can get. I'm all for masks. I think masks are good. I would wear, if I were in a group of people and I was close, I would absolutely.
You think the public will see that at some point?
I mean, I'd have no problem. Actually, I had a mask on. I sort of liked the way I looked. Looked okay. Looked like the Lone Ranger. I have the mask right here, and I carry it, and I will use it gladly. No problem with it. And I've said that, and I say, if you can, use the mask. When you can, use the mask. If you're close to each other, if you're in a group, I would put it on when I'm in a group. Anything that potentially can help, and that certainly can potentially help, is a good thing. I have no problem. I carry it. I wear it. You saw me wearing it a number of times, and I'll continue, please.
Trump doesn't like to wear a mask himself, but he says that he does so when he can't social distance, but also he gets tested like every day, so he knows that he is not transmitting the virus. But he doesn't like wearing the mask when it's unreasonable to do so, and he's honest about that. When Joe Biden is at a speaking event, or at this town hall, for instance, he's not wearing a mask either. So he essentially has the same policy as Trump. So this particular lie doesn't even make any sense. Now, I tend to say that masks only matter if you're sick in order to reduce transmission, which this is actually in line with what the research says.
Well, the World Health Organization, thousands of doctors, public health specialists and scientists from around the world, it says healthy people do not need to wear a face mask when they go about their daily business.
One of the reasons that people wear masks is they think that it's going to protect them. But the virus isn't floating around in the air, so it's not protecting me against anything because it's not there.
When the wearer coughs or sneezes, the surgical mask blocks the large droplets. But on inhalation, air also flows in over the sides. That means it mainly protects others from infection rather than the wearer. Once the mask is wet from breathing after 8 hours wearing time at the most, it has to be discarded.
We don't recommend wearing a face mask unless you are coughing or sneezing a lot. People misunderstand the face mask. They think the face mask is about protecting themselves. It's actually about protecting others if you are producing a lot of respiratory droplets.
There's no evidence to show that masks stop you from getting coronavirus. Masks themselves can actually become contaminated and infect you
And if you're not sick, you shouldn't be wearing a medical mask. But if you are, then you should.
It's probably going to be on my hand because I've shaken hands with someone who's got the virus, and I have transmitted it. I have carried the virus to my face.
Also, masks give a false sense of security, so you may feel better protected than you actually are. And they say masks may make you less likely to wash your hands or practice social distancing.
If you're in an environment where everybody else is wearing a face mask and you're not, then it may make you feel vulnerable because you feel like you don't have the protection everyone else does. But logically, if you're not close to people, they're not coughing and sneezing on you, then a face mask isn't necessary.
Now that said, if you are sick, just stay home. Why are you leaving the house? It's one of the most infectious viruses ever. So just stay home. You're sick anyway. You feel crappy. Get a bowl of soup and watch YouTube videos. This should be the recommendation of the US government, of all the doctors, of everybody. The recommendation should not be wear a mask even if you're healthy because reasons. Many people say, well, you can spread it asymptomatically. That is, you may not know that you're sick. Wrong.
Even if there is some asymptomatic transmission, in all the history of respiratory-borne viruses of any type, asymptomatic transmission has never been the driver of outbreaks. The driver of outbreaks is always a symptomatic person. Even if there's a rare asymptomatic person that might transmit, an epidemic is not driven by asymptomatic carriers.
We have a number of reports from countries who are doing very detailed contact tracing. They're following asymptomatic cases, they're following contacts, and they're not finding secondary transmission onward. It's very rare.
The WHO epidemiologist who made the statement later explaining herself on Twitter, saying pre-symptomatic patients, those who show no initial symptoms, are a transmission risk, whereas asymptomatic patients, those who never show symptoms, are much less likely to transmit the virus.
Now, many in the media have pointed out that the WHO walked this statement back, but they actually didn't. This was the correction that was actually made.
So there were quite a lot of messages that I received overnight and that we received about making some clarifications to some points that I made yesterday at the press conference. And so the majority of transmission that we know about is that people who have symptoms transmit the virus to other people through infectious droplets. And so what I was referring to yesterday in the press conference were a very few studies, some 2 or 3 studies, and that's a very small subset of studies. I also referred to some data that isn't published. We convene global expert networks, and I was referring to some detailed investigations where we had reports from member states saying that when we follow asymptomatic cases, it's very rare, and I use the phrase very rare, that we found a secondary transmission.
So clearly there was some kind of pushback on the original statement, but the WHO and Maria Van Kerkhove did not actually contradict the original statement. The statement was merely put into context, but the original statement was correct. Every study shows that asymptomatic spread is incredibly rare. So for healthy people or for people infected with coronavirus but who are asymptomatic, masks do not help stop the spread. But this is all irrelevant anyway because this is not Trump's position on masks. Trump's position is the same as yours, Joe Biden. And Trump hasn't said anything negative about social distancing, so I don't even know where that came from. It's bizarre. But to use the lie that Trump has said masks don't matter and social distancing doesn't matter, to use that lie to claim that Trump brought the virus on himself, that is particularly insidious.
Since the beginning of this pandemic, the government has been dysfunctional and disorganized. Can you tell us what the Biden-Harris federal response plan is?
So the way we know how to open schools safely, I laid out a plan all the way back in the beginning of the summer. We should provide them for the ventilation. The president had committed, and FEMA had the Emergency Management Organization said we're going to give masks to teachers as well as to the students. And then the administration said, well, no, guess what? That's not a national emergency. Well, what in God's name is a national emergency if that's not a national emergency?
This is a lie that Joe Biden keeps repeating, and I don't know why nobody's called him out on this yet. He's referencing a decision by FEMA to end a reimbursement policy for masks. That is, FEMA was reimbursing state governments for mask purchases. But actually, there's another much more significant government program distributing masks to schools. The Department of Health and Human Services has committed to distributing 125 million masks to schools throughout the country. And you can see this, you can see a state-by-state breakdown on the phe.gov website. I honestly don't even think Joe knows what he's talking about here. This is obviously a lie that his team put together, and he just repeats it like a good little puppet. So, did Trump decide not to send schools masks because he thinks COVID is not a national emergency? No, Trump never did that. This is a nasty lie.
I heard you mention this idea of a national mandate.
Yes.
You've mentioned that before for masks, but what power does a president have?
He does it.
Biden fact-checks himself. So this one is weird because Lester Holt is asking Biden a question about a promise he's made in the past. And Biden actually says, well, I wouldn't actually have the power to do that. So you're saying your original promise was a total lie.
One of the problems is this president said, I take no responsibility.
When the hell did Trump say that? Trump never said this. Trump has indicated that the local governors and mayors establish the guidelines for their own regions, which is true, but there's also national guidelines. And you just said that you would not be able to create a federal mask mandate. So what the hell are you talking about? What's really weird is that he leads into this claim that Trump has refused to take responsibility by stating that if he were president, he would demand that governors take responsibility.
I'd call the governors and I'd say to the mayors as well as the county executives, take responsibility. Take responsibility and lay out the guidelines. Look, folks, one of the problems is this president said, I take no responsibility.
What? So Trump is bad because he claims governors must take responsibility. But if you were president, you would demand that state governors take responsibility. I mean, at least figure out what you want to say here, Joe. Again, you cannot propose governors take responsibility and then condemn Trump for proposing governors take responsibility. I mean, I know the man is senile, but this is bad even for Joe Biden.
And the science matters. Listen to the scientists. Science matters. There's overwhelming scientific consensus.
Okay, this is not a lie per se, but I would classify it as a deception. By stating the science matters as emphatically as he does here, Joe Biden is referencing a common, disingenuous leftist claim of Donald Trump that Trump doesn't listen to scientists and ignores scientific research. This is absolutely false. When Dr. Fauci was grilled on this by Congress, Fauci claimed that Trump had followed every initiative the experts had recommended.
There's this statement put out that the president doesn't follow the science. President following the science? Every single time that and when I say every day, it's like almost every day, and he asks a lot of questions. That's his nature. He's constantly asking you questions. And I never, in the multiple times that I've done that, where I said, for scientific reasons, we really should do this, that he hasn't said, let's do it. Or when he's when he suggests, why don't we do this? And I say, no, that's really not a good idea from a scientific standpoint. He has never overruled me.
He claimed that Trump was basically listening to the scientists. So this claim is very easily debunked, and it's frankly infuriating that such obvious lies are repeated so persistently in the media and by leftist politicians. It's disgraceful.
There's overwhelming scientific consensus. The president's own head of CDC, Dr. Redfield, held up a mask and said, if you put this mask on between now and January, you'll save 100. He said, it's more important than a virus, than a vaccine. You can save more lives. They've laid out University of Washington, one of the great universities that lays out all these projections. They said there could be 200,000 people dead between now and January. And they said, if you wear a mask, we can save 100,000 lives. Now,
the head of the CDC did not hold up a mask and say that you will save 100,000 lives if everybody wears masks. Joe Biden actually makes this point twice in this debate. And this is actually a projection, an estimate from the University of Washington's Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, which may or may not be accurate. And actually, they should put this prediction up against the prediction of how many lives will be saved if everybody who exhibits symptoms simply stays home. My guess is that this tactic would be far more effective, save far more lives, than if every healthy American wore a mask, which is completely pointless. And you know who doesn't mandate masks? Sweden. And they're faring far better than many European countries. The deaths per 100,000 people is lower in Sweden than in the United States, in the UK, in Italy, in Spain, in Belgium. If masks were so effective, wouldn't Sweden be doing far worse than every other country? But Sweden is not doing far worse. They're worse than some, but they're a lot better than others. Clearly, masks aren't the great weapon against the virus that Joe Biden thinks they are.
Remember, I was roundly criticized in my primaries. You can't unite the country. We must. It's the only way we can move forward. And the country is ready to be united, I believe. They're ready to be united. And we have to just change the way we talk to one another. Politics has become so mean and so ugly that we got to get rid of that. We got to just start talking to each other like we respect each other, which we have to.
This is not a lie at all. This is actually a beautiful thing to say. Joe Biden here, in making this statement, is absolutely right. But the implication of this statement is that he is not guilty of the thing he's condemning. He says we have to start talking to each other like we respect each other. And I can only assume that he's referring to the recent debate where Trump was interrupting him all the time and came across very rude, and people were all upset with Donald Trump. But you know what's also disrespectful, Joe? Lying about your opponent. And this is the problem. The left constantly lies about Donald Trump, and they all seem to think that the ends justify the means. And if it helps get Democrats into power, none of the viciousness of their attacks actually matter because the goal is just too important. Well, what they never consider is, what if a Democrat in power is not the best thing for the country? What if Trump will actually do a better job in his second term than Joe Biden would? Well, then every nasty thing that you did, every lie you told, even within the context of your disturbing philosophy of the ends justify the means, which for the record is wrong. I mean, come on, even if the ends are good, evil tactics are still evil. But even within the parameters of your twisted philosophy, if the ends don't end up being good, then your whole campaign is just evil stacked on evil. Maybe take a note from the conservative playbook and go after your opponent on issues instead of making up lies about them, using the FBI to try to sabotage them, and pulling dirty political tricks. Biden's right. We do need to be more respectful. But it's not conservatives that need to take this advice. It's the Democrats.
Our next question comes from Brian Smith. He's a recently unemployed flight attendant who started an online support group.
If you're elected president, what will you do to restore the travel and tourism industry, to get it back on its feet and get it back up to pre-COVID levels so that we're just not throwing more money at it?
Well, look, one of my sister-in-law is an attendant, and she's been for a long, long time facing the same kind of thing you're facing.
Wow, a flight attendant asks a question about the airline industry, and Joe Biden happens to have a flight attendant in the family, so he can relate. What a coincidence. Nothing staged about that. But, and this may not be a lie, but Joe's response to this question makes no sense. Listen to this.
Recently, the Department of Transportation turned down a request from bus drivers and mass transit people and you guys of saying everybody to get in a plane has to have a mask on. If they don't have a mask on, then they can't get in the plane. What are we doing? Do you feel comfortable being being an attendant and people getting on a crowded plane or not a crowded plane with no mask? You don't. It's just to protect you, protect one another. It's within our power to do it.
Okay, what airline is Joe Biden using where masks are not mandated? Masks are mandated on literally every airline. Now, he wouldn't know that, I guess, because he flies private like every good climate change alarmist. But getting back to the point, who on Joe's team came up with this criticism of Donald Trump? Who was like, we need to make a major point about how airline passengers aren't required to wear masks during this pandemic when all airlines require masks? It's bizarre. I mean, which voters is this going to ring true for? Actually, I've just realized something. There's not a lot of Americans flying, right? So it's possible that somebody on Biden's team realized, oh, people don't really know what's going on with the airlines. They're not even on the planes. So they don't know one way or another. We can just lie to them and they'll be tricked into thinking that this is a problem. This is a classic example of Democrats blatantly lying to the American people for political gain. This, by the way, This, folks, is why they are constantly claiming that Donald Trump is lying to the American people. This is a deflection tactic, right? Misdirection. If they can convince voters that Trump's lying to them, then every lie that they tell them, every lie that contradicts what Trump is saying, well, their voters will accept that as the truth. I mean, it's an absolutely despicable kind of politics, but that is pretty much par for the course for the left. When people talk about how politics are dirty, right, like a dirty business, and how everybody, hates politicians historically because they're all liars and con men, what they're really talking about is Democrats. Now, eventually, Joe Biden was asked about the debate fiasco directly, and he had this to say.
The one thing that became absolutely clear, he didn't want to answer any questions. He did not want to talk about substance. If you notice, not one single time that I can recall did he offer a substantive answer or criticism related to a policy matter. It was all invective. It was all personal. It was all things that have nothing to do with whether they're going to change these people's lives for the better.
But that's not true. Trump spoke about policy a lot, I think a lot more than Biden did. I mean, I still think that Trump did a terrible job in the debate. In a debate, what you want to do is convince voters who are on the fence, or maybe who don't like you but would vote for you anyway because you have the best policies. You want to convince those people to vote for you, and Trump did just the opposite. But to say that he never talked once about policy, false, big time.
It's a right to protest peacefully, but once you pick up a bat and start smashing windows, once in fact you light something on fire, once you engage in violence, you should be arrested and held accountable. And I've never had a position different than that from the very beginning.
This is true. To Biden's credit, he has never called for the defunding of police, and he has always maintained that if you're a violent rioter, that you should be arrested. However, he has also claimed that the riots are Trump's fault. And he has also claimed that the riots are being conducted by white supremacists.
There's a left-wing
white supremacists. They're looking for more violence and more disruption because it helps them politically. He views this as a political benefit to him. He's rooting for more violence, not less. And it's clear about that. Because Donald Trump adds fuel to every fire. He's got no problem with right-wing militia, white supremacists, and vigilantes with assault weapons, often in the middle of the violence.
And as those videos roll in, they'll be uploaded here in the hope those caught on camera can be identified, like this guy who apparently live-streamed himself smashing an ATM, or this suspect spotted helping himself to new glasses.
Wow, those white supremacists are so tan. Biden also said in the last debate that Antifa was not an organization, but rather an idea, which, okay, maybe he wasn't excusing Antifa, but it sure sounded like it.
Antifa's an idea, not an organization.
Oh, you got it.
Not militia.
And the worst thing is that Biden, just like everybody else on the left, has neglected to call riots riots. Sure, you say people who commit acts of violence, arson, vandalism, these people should be arrested. But when these so-called peaceful protesters do commit these crimes, you refuse to admit it. So yes, it's true, Biden has never called for defunding the police, and he's acknowledged that rioters should be arrested, but he's called rioters peaceful protesters and blamed Trump and white supremacists for any and all violence. So I give him a little credit on this one, but not much.
The greatest domestic threat to terrorism are white supremacists. White supremacists. And when you have a president saying to one particular group of white supremacists that, in fact, stand down but stand by, that is like a clarion call to get ready. Get ready. It's totally, totally inappropriate.
All right, there are two absolutely vicious deceptions here. First, the greatest domestic terrorism threat is not white supremacists. That's absolute nonsense. I don't care what BS report Christopher Wray puts out. If you don't believe me, consider that the largest KKK group in the United States is called the Loyal White Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, and it's estimated that they have somewhere between 150 and 200 members. Ooh. Nationwide, the number is, from what I've been able to find, estimated to be something like 3,000 members. And yeah, that may sound like a lot, but consider that there's something like 300 million people in America. The Nation of Islam, on the other hand, a black racist organization that preaches hate against white people, this group is estimated to have between 20 and 50,000 active members. And that estimate is from 2007. I couldn't find an estimate more recent than that. So yeah, black racism against white people is a much bigger problem than white racism against black people, or against anyone else for that matter. But then Biden goes on to say that Trump told a group of white supremacists to get ready. I mean, wow. Could you be any more deceptive, Joe? The answer, of course, is no. He can't. Because that's about the nastiest, most vicious lie that I've heard so far against Donald Trump. Look, first, the Proud Boys are not a white supremacist group. I happen to know the current leader of the Proud Boys. His name is Enrique Tarrio. He's a Cuban American. And again, that is one tan white supremacist. Look, obviously this guy is not a white supremacist, but the left wants to classify the Proud Boys as white supremacists because it helps slander anyone they disagree with on anything as racists, which, as we know, is their number one tactic. So first, Proud Boys are not a white supremacist group, and second, Trump did not say, nor did he suggest in any way, that the Proud Boys should, quote, get ready. He specifically said, stand down and stand by. And yes, you can interpret the words stand by as wait for my order, but it can also mean do nothing, as in just stand by and watch. To tell people that by the words stand by, Trump meant to indicate to a white supremacist group to get ready, well, that's worse than an uncharitable interpretation. That's an outright distortion. And the really nefarious thing is that the left has done this so often that people are absolutely convinced of it. Sure, there's no smoking gun, but if you distort Trump's words 1,000 times and every single time you try to convince people that what he said is racist, a lot of people are eventually going to be convinced. This is called death by 1,000 cuts. Sure, one little cut may not seem so bad, but after 1,000, you're going to bleed out. Or in the case of 1,000 little lies, you're going to be convinced.
The reason I decided to run for office, I hadn't planned on running again. I give you my word, after my son passed, I wasn't going to run again. But when I saw those people coming out of the woods, literally the fields, carrying torches in Charlottesville, screeching that, if you close your eyes, remember what you saw. Their veins bulging, preaching anti-Semitic hate, the same exact language used in Germany in the 30s, accompanied by the Ku Klux Klan. And when a young woman was innocently killed, what was the question asked of the president? What do you think? He said there are very fine people on both sides. No president has ever said anything remotely like that. And so there's this constant dog whistle, and it bothers me a lot.
Again, Joe Biden repeats this lie every time he gets on stage. No, Trump did not say that white supremacists were, quote, good people. Even Jake Tapper, a man who clearly despises Donald Trump, even Tapper acknowledged that Trump specifically condemned white supremacists in Charlottesville.
Now, elsewhere in those remarks, the president did condemn neo-Nazis and white supremacists. So he's not saying that the neo-Nazis and white supremacists are very fine people, but he is saying people protesting alongside those neo-Nazis and white supremacists are very fine people. Who are they?
Of course, Tapper couldn't figure out that Trump was talking specifically about those protesting the destruction of historical statues. I don't know why that's so difficult to figure out. I'm against the destruction of historical statues, and I have no love for the Confederacy. I'm from Oregon. I have ancestors who fought for the North. But I still think the preservation of historical statues is a good thing. I'm definitely not a white supremacist. And I'd like to think that I am a good person. I didn't march in Charlottesville, but the idea that there could not possibly be supporters of the preservation of historical monuments that are good people there, I mean, that's just absurd. And in truth, Trump said many more times in that press conference that there were bad people on both sides. So the primary point he was trying to make is that Antifa are bad hombres, which is something that CNN denied for ages. They still tend to ignore, downplay, and deny that Antifa is evil. So in typical left-wing fashion, the left is once again accusing Donald Trump of doing exactly what they're doing themselves. All right, well, that's it for me. And remember, it's not that our liberal friends are ignorant. It's just they know so much that is not so. Good night.
Those who would trade our freedom for the soup kitchen of the welfare state have told us they have a utopian solution of peace without victory. They call their policy accommodation. They say we offer simple answers to complex problems. Well, perhaps there is a simple answer. That we want our national policy based on what we know in our hearts is morally right.